Welcome to Iron Butterfly Podcast. My name is Megan Jaffer.
And I'm Katie Hopkins, and we'll be your hosts.
We created Iron Butterfly Podcast in honor of Eloise Page, the original Iron Butterfly. Our podcast continues her legacy, inviting the unsung heroines of the United States intelligence community to share their stories with aspiring leaders like you.
Hi, my name is Rosanna Minshew. I'm the CEO and founder of SpyHer. I spent 15 years in operations at CIA. I left in 2017 and started doing spy-themed tours and events in my free time. That developed into a small business that was created in 2021. And we deliver espionage-themed historical and interactive tours throughout Washington, D.C. and New York City. Our tours are educational, fun, and interactive. We've included some operational elements, so guests have a chance to step into the shoes of a CIA operative on a mission in the field. Our events and our tours are open to teams and groups, and we have branched into bespoke missions that we do for corporate clients that span 3 to 4 hours. Our team is about 10 former CIA, 1 former Israeli official, and 1 former French military officer. So we deliver in Russian, Turkish, Hebrew, Arabic, Spanish, and French, and English. We have 1 former CIA who is now a sommelier, and our most popular corporate event is a blind wine tasting where we talk about wine and we tell stories of alcohol and how that impacted our roles, our job in the field, where we spot, assess, develop, recruit, and handle human sources. And I'm happy to be here today and sponsor today's episode. Today, we're joined on the Iron Butterfly podcast by Suzanne Spaulding. Suzanne is currently a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, where she established the Defending Democratic Institutions Project. Some of her favorite career highlights include serving as legal advisor for the Nonproliferation Center at the CIA, chief counsel for both the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence Minority Staff, executive director of Congressional Commissions on Weapons of Mass Destruction and Terrorism, and as a member of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. She describes herself as an officious intermeddler, idealistic, and by her own admission, not as funny as she thinks she is. When she's not tackling the world's hardest problems, you might find her birding, spending time with her grandkids, or reflecting on some of the wild moments in her life, like meeting Gaddafi in his hometown or doing the Hokey Pokey with the KBG. Casual. Suzanne, welcome to Iron Butterfly.
We are so happy for you to be here. It's a long time coming. I was really excited about today because we all know who you are, but I don't actually know who you are as a person. And I'm really excited to learn myself, which I'm sure the audience is going to be really excited to learn as well. And you always just, I've heard and I feel, just make people feel at peace. I feel very comfortable. And so I'm really excited about this.
That is.
For sure.
That's very nice, Megan.
Well, thanks. I am just going to jump in.
Yeah, let's
Ready?
do it.
Okay, so we normally start just from the beginning, and we'd love to learn where you're from and how you grew up and kind of what shaped you and molded you and what brought you to the intelligence community.
Yeah, I was born in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina.
Wow.
A very long time ago. And my dad was in the Marine Corps. My mother had also been in the Marine Corps. She was a corporal in the Marine Corps during World War II, but she got married in her dress whites. I have this wonderful photo of her
I got
on
the
her
chills.
wedding day.
I know.
Yeah, really wonderful, biggest smile. But then she got out and had 7 children. I was raised one of 7.
Where were you?
Yeah, where are you
in the
in that?
lineup?
I'm number 5,
Mandel.
so 2 younger.
Okay.
Yep. And I loved being one of 7 children. I've always said I wish I could have given that gift to my kids, but when we had 2, we realized, my husband and I, that man-to-man defense was all we could handle. That zone defense was beyond us, and so we stopped at 2. But it was really special growing up that way, and I really attribute to my parents primarily my love of public service and commitment to public service. My dad, obviously in the Marine Corps, he was killed in Vietnam.
Oh my goodness.
In 1966. I was 9. The oldest of the 7 was 19. The youngest was 6. And my mother, hero that she was raised those 7 children. And she was a teacher, but she went to work on the Hill after Daddy died. And as I was growing up, when I would have days off of school, I would ride in to work with her and just wander around on Capitol Hill. You know, that was the days before the shooting at the Capitol way back when they first started to lock things down, when you could just wander in and wander into hearings and wander into congressional offices. And I had a great time. And I fell in love with it. I remember being in the gallery of I can't remember if it was the House or the Senate, when they were voting on giving 18-year-olds the right to vote. So that's a long time ago.
So what was it? I don't even know what
It was 21.
It was.
You had to
So
be
it was like
21.
drinking.
Yep. I remember the arguments. This was during the Vietnam War, that if they're old enough to go over and die for their country, they're old enough to vote.
Wow.
Anyway, it instilled in me, obviously, a real love of politics, policy, and the Hill, and so I went. I remember in 7th grade thinking I wanted to run for office. Yep.
So impressive.
You think very small.
My mother was always like that. We were a Catholic family, and like a lot of Catholic families, there were 5 boys and just 2 of us girls.
Oh, wow.
And the boys wanted to be priests. For mother, it was, no, you are going to be pope.
No, you're going to the top. Yeah.
And if you're interested in politics, you're going to be president. And she was great that way. But I started reading the biographies of politicians, and in those days, most of them were lawyers.
Okay.
And so I thought, that's what you do. You go to law school, and then you run for office. So I had made up my mind at that point I was going to go to law school. Fortunately, somewhere along the way, I dropped the idea of running for office. I remember clearly looking at a political cartoon, I think when John Warner was senator of Virginia, and it was mocking his marriage to Elizabeth Taylor.
Elizabeth Taylor, yeah.
And a very unflattering caricature of her. And I thought, I don't think I have thick enough skin to be in politics. So, but I did go to law school. I went straight through, and I went to work for a law firm because that was sort of the easy thing to do out of law school. Mm-hmm. But I told everyone that I knew that I wanted to work on the Hill. And after a few years in the law firm, someone told me about an opening up on Capitol Hill, and I went and interviewed with Arlen Specter, Republican from Pennsylvania, and went to be his senior counsel.
Wow.
Yeah. And while I was working for Senator Specter, he was very big on terrorism issues, and I began to work a lot on terrorism issues. He was on the Senate Intelligence Committee. I was able to work with his team over there, and it was a great experience for me working on the Hill, and I'd finally gotten to where I wanted to be, working there on the Hill. Then I had my first child and decided to stay home.
Okay.
Which was not in my plan originally, but when I was home with the baby for maternity leave, just decided I really didn't want to go back, and I stayed home for a while, which is one of the things I always like to talk about because I did that several times in my career. And, people say that you can't do that, you can't step aside, it'll be too hard to get back, and I was incredibly fortunate, but I'm here to say that you can do it. It can be done.
Yeah.
I think.
What was that thought process like? Like, can you take us back to that moment where you had your child and you were looking at these two paths of like trying to juggle it all or doing both and kind of integrating that or just staying home? Like, what was that decision-making process like for you? Because I think a lot of women find themselves facing, whether it's, through childbirth or otherwise, just kind of these crossroads. How did you navigate that?
Yeah, and I think I don't mean to downplay in any way how hard that is. Trying to make those decisions of family, career. For me, I think it really helped that I was probably ready to leave that office anyway. Capitol Hill is a hard place to be, and Arlen Specter was not an easy member to work for. He had the reputation of being one of the worst to work for. I do remember that he used to yell at his staff all the time, but the first time he yelled at me, I yelled back at him, and he never yelled at me again.
Good for
Yeah.
you.
Can we get like a brief replay of that encounter? Because I would love that.
It helped that we were on the little subway going between the Hart
Underneath.
Building and the Capitol, or the Dirksen Building and the Capitol, because there was some noise that justified my raising my voice in response to his challenging me. But
That's pretty.
you just
I could
you
see
just have
the
to stand up.
victorious exit too off the trolley. It's pretty good.
It was a good moment. But I think that helped. That I was it wasn't a job that I passionately loved and couldn't imagine leaving, and I think thanks to my mother having always tried to build up my confidence, and that was relatively early in my career. I thought I felt fairly confident that I'd be able to find something when I was ready to go back. And sure enough, I was lucky enough to get a job at the Central Intelligence Agency in the General Counsel's office. And so much serendipity in my career. Just one of the women I had worked with at the law firm when I first graduated from law school, it was Crowell and Mooring, was the law firm that I went to work for. Okay. She was working part-time in the General Counsel's office at CIA at that time, when I was thinking, okay, I'm ready to go back to work. And so I called her up and interviewed and got a job at CIA. It took them about a year to clear me. I won't talk about the number of times I flunked the polygraph, but they ultimately concluded that I was an honest person and they let me come in.
We actually like talking about that because
it happens to
it happens
a lot
to
of people.
everyone, and when you're going through it, the people who are failing, flunking, whatever, they think they're the only ones, right? And it's so hard on them. And Katie and I have counseled many young women who think it's like the end, right? And we try to tell them ahead of time, you probably are going to fail one or two times, and it's okay. You just have to have perseverance. So I hate hearing that you had to go through a hard time, but we love hearing that at the same time because the audience needs to hear that that's normal and it's okay.
Yeah.
And you can get past it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Oh, Megan, thank you for being there for those folks. It is it's a really tricky thing to navigate. And I think sometimes they're just messing with you. I don't think you've failed it at all. It's just their way of trying to get you to see if if you got a guilty conscience. But I did manage to make it through that, although I will say, because it took so long, by the time I started at CIA, I was pregnant with my second child. Because at some point in the process, I thought, oh, the hell with you guys. I was going to wait.
Yeah,
I was going to
of course.
start, work for a few months, and then, get
Sure.
pregnant.
Yeah.
But I decided to go ahead, and I was lucky enough, and I got pregnant. But it was a little bit awkward on my very first day being introduced to people. I had just started showing, and I didn't want everybody to know on day one
You're
that I'd
leaving
showed
in
up
a couple months.
But I went to work at the General Counsel's office at CIA, and that was wonderful. It was really one of my favorite jobs. It was fascinating. I got great advice from Elizabeth Rinskoff Parker, who was Elizabeth Rinskoff at the time, who was the General Counsel, who continues to be a source of wonderful wisdom and mentoring for me and a great friend. And to make sure that you're part of the team. That when they come to you and say, can we do this, that you're not just the lawyer who says no, but that you say, well, no, you can't do it that way, but let's talk about what you're trying to achieve, and what the law requires, and see if we can find a way for you to accomplish what the mission, needs. And so they begin to look at you as part of the team, and that was great. Then I left CIA when Arlen Specter took over the Senate Intelligence Committee and asked me to come and be his general counsel. So again,
Despite the fact you yelled at him.
Yeah,
Exactly. Despite the fact that I walked out on him when I had my baby. And that was, again, just a wonderful experience. Great group, and amazingly bipartisan atmosphere at that committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee, in those days. This was the mid-'90s, and it was Arlen Specter as chair and Bob Kerrey as the vice chair. And they worked very well together. So that was really terrific. I'm not, I moved around a lot. I was there for 3 years. I left when new leadership came in the committee that did not have the same bipartisan sort of commitment and spirit. I stayed for a few months and then I left. Again, I was home for a little while to get reacquainted with my children. And then the commission that I'd actually worked to establish, the Commission to Assess the Organization of the Federal Government to Combat the Proliferation of Weapons of Mass Destruction. Crazy long name.
Is there an acronym?
Well, no, there wasn't, but our receptionist took to answering the phone, Weapons of Mass Destruction.
That's awesome.
Weapons of mass destruction. How can I help you?
And my friend Ed Levine used to, when he would call and she would say that, he would say, buying or selling? Yeah. That commission was established, and I got to go be executive director of that commission. It was chaired by John Deutsch, and Arlen was on it, and a number of other really impressive folks. And so that was great, and something I always, tell young people, particularly who are interested in national security careers, to be on the lookout. Congress creates these commissions, Megan, as you know, quite often when they want to kick the can down the road.
Yeah.
They don't know what the answers are, and that's a great place to work. To get to meet lots of people, learn lots of things. So that was really fun. And then when that ended, I got an excuse to stay home again for a little while with my kids. And then Congress created a commission on terrorism. L. Paul Bremer III, Jerry Bremer of Grand Poobah in Iraq fame, was the chair of that. And he asked me to come and be executive director of that commission, where I met Jane Harmon, who was on that commission, along with other terrific people, Juliette Kayyem and some others who you know. And when that was over, home again with my kids for a while, and then Jane Harmon asked me to come and be her chief counsel on the House Intelligence Committee when she was reelected to the House. So, again, just that you can see the thread of serendipity, right?
Wow.
Just really lucky. I, kind of being in the right place at the right time. My mother always told me, luck is really important, but you got to do what you got to do to be in a position to take advantage of that luck. So that's advice I always give, but don't ever discount, right, the role of luck in your career.
What is being, so these congressional commissions, it sounds like you were part of several of them. What does that actually look like? Like, what are the commissions doing? What are you doing as the leader of these commissions or the executive director of these commissions? Like, what are they? What does that look like?
It's a great question, Kate. They are, of course, established by Congress, at least most of them, certainly the ones I've been involved in, and they're asked, and they're given a mission. They're asked to look into an issue or a set of issues. So the first one was how is the government organized most effectively to address this scary issue at that time of the spread of weapons of mass destruction, and so you call in folks from across government in that instance, but also you figure out who are the experts on the outside who can give you some fresh perspective on this, and as the executive director, I came up with a work plan at the outset. This is a way to break this topic down. These are the kinds of people we'd want to hear from at each of our meetings. And so then you have a wonderful opportunity. And as I always said to my staff, this is kind of like writing a term paper, and you have a year in that instance to do it. If we can't schedule things and work this out in a work plan in a way that is consistent with having a decent work-life balance, shame on us. And that's the other nice thing about commissions. You are not responding to crises and real-world events. You are engaged in what is basically largely an academic, if you will, exercise. And so that's how it proceeds. You get an opportunity, and so the staff gets to hear, potentially meet, interact with, first of all, that wonderful group of commissioners, and then all of those smart people who come in. And then you write a report. And I had both those commissions were chaired by really smart, hard-driving individuals who were committed to making practical recommendations in this report. Jerry Bremer, particularly, our report on terrorism was very short because he said, we are not going to talk about an issue unless we have a concrete and practical recommendation to address it. We're not just going to pontificate in this report. And that report came out in 2000, June, the summer of 2000. And on September 10th of 2001, Jerry Bremer and Jane Harmon were having lunch in the congressional dining room, bemoaning the fact that almost none of our recommendations had been implemented.
Wow.
Oh, man.
And after the attacks of the next day, nearly all of them were ultimately implemented.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of amazing that that was on the shelf as like an easy button.
And we had a picture of the World Trade Center, first bombing of the World Trade Center
Oh, my
back in
gosh.
93 on the cover of the report. And thanks really largely, I would have to say, to Jim Woolsey, we did, talk about Al-Qaeda as a threat and the changing nature of terrorism.
Wow. That's pretty crazy. So I think what's really interesting about your career is that you spent time both at CIA, which is obviously part of the executive branch, and on the Hill as part of the legislative branch. And obviously those are like a little bit contentious with one another, right? But I have to also imagine that they felt different, like there were different cultures and like different vibes to both of those environments. What was that like for you, kind of being on both sides of that? And was that your experience?
Absolutely, Kate, and it's a good observation. They are very different. And I think I have benefited in my career for having had both experiences at both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. Obviously, when you're in that role of oversight, you're constantly questioning, challenging. And I remember very clearly back when I was first working for Arlen Specter back in the early 80s, I met a guy who worked for the other senator from Pennsylvania at the time, John Hines, who was tragically killed in a helicopter accident. But he was the other senator from Pennsylvania, and I met a guy working for him who was named George Tenet. And George and I became kind of friends, and George spent a long time on the Hill. And I remember being at a meeting with him when he had transitioned to the executive branch, and he was still in that oversight, congressional asking questions mode, pushing, challenging, really. And I remember thinking, okay, that's an okay approach to leadership here, but ultimately you're going to have to decide and do something and defend it. And he did. Of course, he definitely came around and made that transition very nicely. But I always remember that as a reminder to me that those are different roles that you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. That's super interesting.
Yeah, it's easy to from the perspective of the Hill, to just challenge and question everything. And it's a lot different when you own it, and you've got to make decisions and move things forward and make things happen.
Yeah.
Totally. I have more questions.
Go ahead.
So I'm kind of curious how a lot of the roles that you've described sound like they're based in the DC area, but you also have some kind of crazy stories of things that you've done abroad. So where does that fit in? Kind of take us through that and a couple of those fun stories.
Yeah, so the first one, where I wound up literally doing the Hokey Pokey with the KGB, was when I was at CIA. And I was the legal advisor for the folks who worried about the proliferation of WMD. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, we started putting together interagency delegations to go and meet with folks in Eastern and Central Europe, former Soviet republics, about how to stop the spread of weapons of mass destruction. And one of the places that we went was Kazakhstan. And we were, I'll digress for a minute and tell you an embarrassing story. The first night that we were in Kazakhstan, and we were at a big dinner, probably 40 of us maybe. There, we were with their intelligence service folks, as well as their sort of customs and border folks, et cetera, sitting around the table. And they had me seated next to the head of the delegation, their top intelligence guy. And we were having a great, lovely conversation. And at one point, he apologizes for his English not being better. And I said, no, your English is great. They were speaking Russian. Mm-hmm. I said, it's certainly better than my Russian. I don't know any Russian. And then I remembered, oh, yeah, I do. Oh, no. My resident advisor in college had taught me one phrase in Russian. Uh-huh. And I'm probably, for Russian speakers out there, I apologize. I'm sure I'm not going to pronounce this exactly right. But without stopping to think about what it was, I said, and it was a moment when the conversation around the table happened to have a lull. And I said, "Ya lublю тебя," which I think means I love you. People on my side of the table were thinking, "Man, Suzanne is really doing great with this guy."
Yeah,
it was a gasp and an intake of breath. But the next night, they took us out to their dacha out in the mountains in Kazakhstan for a fabulous meal. And to make a long story short, their head of the top intelligence guy actually was a big Beatles fan and played the guitar and sang songs. And then they all sang their lovely Kazakh folk songs. And I said to my team, we should sing American folk songs. So I really shouldn't admit this, but we did. We sang Kumbaya. I think we sang Where Have All the Flowers Gone? By Bob Dylan. You could tell where my upbringing was.
Oh, my goodness.
But at one point I said, we should, because they were dancing, doing their sort of folk dancing. I said, we should do the Hokey Pokey. And so we did. Yeah.
Amazing. Are there pictures of this somewhere?
I certainly hope not. In fact, I was very worried because a couple weeks later, the DCI, Director of Central Intelligence, was going to be coming to Kazakhstan. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, my God, if they tell him
that we did the Hokey
Pokey. Or suggest that, we know this is your tradition. Why don't we do it?
Amazing.
But that was great fun.
When you're doing the Hokey Pokey with the KGB, like what was going through your mind? Like were you?
We were
did
laughing
it just feel so surreal?
hard. And my good friend, who was a case officer next to me, talked about how figuratively for her entire career she'd been doing the Hokey Pokey with the KGB, and here she was literally doing the Hokey Pokey with the KGB. It was an amazing moment. It was really great.
That's so awesome. I don't know what's better, doing the Hokey Pokey with the KGB or singing Kumbaya with the KGB.
Right?
Those are both pretty good.
Right? Because you always say, it's not like we're all going to sit around
Hokey
and sing.
Pokey, because you're doing a dance.
It's pretty crazy.
You're doing it.
Probably stop telling that story. No, but yeah, people say we're not. Well, it's not like we're going to sit around and do kumbaya with them. I thought, well, yeah,
we're actually going to do that. We actually are going to do that.
And you also met Gaddafi,
and that was when that was part of when I was working for Jane Harman on the House Intelligence Committee, and of course this was shortly after Gaddafi had said he was giving up the pursuit of weapons of mass destruction, and we had this sort of opening, right? And I don't think we were the first congressional delegation in there, but we were, I think, maybe the second congressional delegation to come in. And I think it was on our way back from Iraq. But at any event, we made a stop to see Gaddafi. And they redirected us from our original plan, which was to meet with him in Tripoli, to Sirte. Which is where he was hanging out, which is the place where he was born. And we kept waiting for a very long time. But we ultimately met with him in this tent out in the desert with camels
How many
walking
of you
around.
were there, roughly?
There were five or six members of Congress, and then probably an equal number of staff.
And how many of them were women?
Two of us. Well, two staff people, and I think Jane. Trying to remember whether Susan Collins was on that trip. I don't think she was. I think Jane was the only woman.
And
in the
how was
delegation.
that?
It was interesting. I don't think it made a big difference to him.
Really? That you guys are women?
I actually think he was. I wonder. They kept us waiting a very long time, and Jane was the one who actually finally forced the issue and said, "We're going back to the airport and flying back if you can't produce him," basically. And suddenly we had the meeting. So good for her.
And was he
She
as
she was great.
eccentric as
He- yes.
is portrayed to be?
Yes, totally bizarre, and rambling. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm curious, like, what you remember from that meeting
yeah,
of him.
Yeah, he seemed. I have to say, he seemed glassy-eyed to me. He seemed. I mean, we wondered whether he was doped up on pain pills or what have you, and really, it's at one point the staff was asked to leave, and the members remained behind. So then we had to get it from them secondhand. So did he ever say anything interesting or worthwhile?
No.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah.
It's a story.
Yeah. And I just thought it was, years later, of course, then when he was murdered and in CERT.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I guess my mind, I can't help but think, like, putting myself in kind of your shoes. As a woman going to these areas all over the world, did you ever feel like you had to act a certain way or behave a certain way? Or did you feel like you could be kind of authentically yourself?
The only time I remember really it being an issue was when I went to Saudi Arabia. And at that point, I was out of government, and I went with a group based at the University of Virginia called the Critical Incident Analysis Group. And we went for a big conference that we put on. And I remember the first time when we were getting off the plane when we landed, they first came on and gave us the scarves and gown to wear, and I was fine with that. And they said, we just want you to wear this in the bus when you're traveling through the streets, but when you get into the building where we're having the conference, you don't need to wear any of this. You're fine. And I remember thinking how sort of elitist I thought that attitude was, that we can handle this, but
That's interesting.
ordinary
But
people can't.
Oh, wow.
Right? It wasn't. I thought that was odd. And then we were going to go to a festival one evening, and so they were very particular that we had to completely, really, not just drape a scarf around, but pin it, make sure there was absolutely no hair showing, et cetera. And the guys didn't have to do anything.
Yeah.
And much to my surprise, I mean, I just really wasn't prepared for this, I found myself feeling really angry. And I say I was surprised because I've always sort of thought, well, you have to respect countries' cultures and traditions, but the more living it, experiencing it, seeing it firsthand, was really striking for me.
So I'm curious, we talk about the butterfly effect a lot, which is this idea that these kind of small things that you do kind of throughout your career, throughout your life can like really grow over time and become, really lasting and impactful change. And when you look back on your personal life, professional life, which it sounds like you've lived a very balanced and integrated version of both of those things, like what stands out to you as being kind of like your butterfly effect in the world?
Oh gosh, that's hard. I don't know. I just came earlier this evening from a farewell for Jen Easterly, and it was really wonderful. She's been an amazing leader for an organization that I care deeply about. it was reminding me of my farewell when I left what was then called NPPD, and all of the wonderful people, men and women, who I had the honor and privilege of working with, who came up to me and told me stories about things I had said that had made such a big difference to them, and had, in some cases, it sort of changed the way they thought about things. And I thought, you just never really know. You just don't know. Because I remembered almost none of the things they said.
Wow.
Right? Like, remember when you told me? And I'm thinking, no, I don't remember saying that. So I just think it's really hard to know. I think it is true. It's easier for me to see it in other people. It is so clear to me that Jen has had a huge impact on so many people, and people she'll never know and never meet. And so I suspect that there's some of that. I've had wonderful opportunity to speak to big groups and meet lots of people, and I hope that some of them have, felt somewhat more empowered every time they see a woman who's in a position, who's managed to get to senior positions. So,
Well, I would like to say that in extension to that answer is, the lasting effect of everything that you're doing for young women in the national security space. And I'd be remiss not to mention girl security. And I'm going to get emotional, and I don't know why.
yeah, it's
one of those days.
It's worth getting emotional over. Yeah.
So we both love Lauren Buetta. And she, I know she couldn't have done what she did without you, and I feel confident in saying that without her permission, because I know she would say the same thing. And I know she's told me so many times that, your support and your guidance and your advocacy for all of those young women, pushes the organization forward. So I think that's, in addition.
Oh, that's so sweet of you to say. And I'm so glad you brought up girl security, because it is just one of my very, very favorite things that I get to do, to be on the board of that amazing organization. And Lauren is such an inspiration, isn't she? She
is
amazingly strong, wise, gentle, thoughtful, powerful woman.
all of them, all of those things.
Yep. And that organization is doing great things. And anyone who's listening to this who doesn't know girl security immediately should enter it into your search engine and find it's girlsecurity.org, I think, and learn about them, because they are wonderful, and everyone should be engaged with them. They're doing amazing work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One thing I also love about your answer, Suzanne, is that a lot of the impact that we have comes in these small moments. And I think it's just such a good reminder, because a lot of times people get discouraged because they're like, I'm not the president or a CEO or the Pope. Like, what am I going to do? Just this small person, living my life every day. And I think it's such an important reminder that, like, yes, we all in our lives, when we're on stage or giving a keynote or something, we can be big in those big moments, but like the things that stick with people are when you're big in small moments too. And we all have those. Like, we all interact with people, our family, our friends, our coworkers. And I think it's just a good reminder of, like, you can have this effect without even realizing it.
Yep, I think that's true. And you can have it at every level of your career. You don't have to be a big, I think of some of the young people that have worked with me, and I watch them have an impact with people around them because of the way that they live their lives and are professionals, et cetera. So I think that's true. I also think, I don't know this, all of the physics behind the butterfly effect, but
We don't either.
right? But I think it is the interplay of lots of different forces.
Oh,
right?
I love that.
I think it starts with, they like to say it starts with a single butterfly flapping its wings, but that in a vacuum does not cause the butterfly effect. It is an interplay of lots of different things. And so I think it is important, as you think about what difference am I making, that you think about what difference am I making as part of a team, as part of an effort in conjunction with other people, right? Not just what am I doing by myself. And I was so touched at this farewell that a couple people mentioned that I worked so hard to move NPPD from NPPD, National Protection Programs Directorate, to CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency that it is today. And I thought, that's really sweet. I'm, sort of looked at as the grandmother, I think. And given credit for the vision of it. But it really was the vision of so many people, and obviously the work. It only came to fruition because of, Chris Krebs grabbed that baton and ran with it, and has reached the level that it has today because of Jen's leadership. And I hope it will continue to have the good fortune of great leadership as it goes forward. But that's I look back at that and I take great pride in it, but not because I made this happen, but because I was part of, a group and a lot of people, and people on the Hill and elsewhere, that made this happen.
Yeah.
And I think it's good to take credit for those things too.
Absolutely.
I love that.
So, Suzanne, tell us what you do for fun.
I had that. I was like, my last question. I was
Okay,
like,
good.
We want to know.
My most fun is being with my grandchildren. I have most recent 7 months old granddaughter, and oldest is a 4-year-old grandson. And I have both my kids. I have a boy and a girl who I adore, and they each have given me a boy and a girl.
Oh my gosh, how amazing!
So, and they all live in Washington D.C.
Oh my gosh!
So life just doesn't get any better. I feel so incredibly blessed, and my happiest moments, of course, are when I'm with them.
Absolutely.
And they make me laugh and give me perspective and provide a wonderful distraction that is urgently needed. So that's my very favorite. And then my hobby, as you mentioned, is I'm a late in life birder. I do love just looking at birds.
So do you have, I got this for Christmas last year, and I'm sure you have it. It's the bird feeder that you can see. It's like
Bird Buddy
yes.
is mine. Yes, I
Yes.
probably, we're plugging a particular brand, but yes, I just set it up.
Oh my gosh.
I got it like a year ago, and I've had no time, despite my passion for birds, I've had no time to sort of get it out of the box and set it up. And I finally, over this holiday period, there was a lull in my,
And you set it
and
up.
I set it up. The birds haven't found it yet.
It takes time.
Yeah.
So at first I got upset because I was like, and I did mine in the spring, so they were out and about. And I thought, what the heck? They're not showing up. And then once they find it, it really is true, like depending on the seeds, those are the types of birds. So I would switch it out so I could get different birds. Now, here's a pro tip. You have to be careful. The squirrels will crawl up, and you will see their face like this, and they will try to get in to where you put the food in. So you have to really secure it because the squirrels will go crazy. Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
You're so passionate right now.
I know, because I love it.
I love this, Megan. I'm so
Iron Butterfly is anti-squirrel.
No, I love the squirrels, but they,
they will chew that thing to bits.
they will.
Yeah.
So you have to make sure it's super secure.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciate that.
You're going to love it.
Yeah.
You're going to love it.
Yeah.
You're going to see all the beautiful birds. I had cardinals and all kinds, like finches and bluebirds. And yeah, you're going to love
wonderful. Oh, I'm so excited to be talking to a fellow
admirer,
admirer,
but very,
Yeah.
just at basic level. But I do love the birds too.
Great. That's great.
Well, we've come to the end where we have one last question, and everyone always tells us it's the hardest one. So, in keeping with our name, Iron Butterfly, who was Eloise Page's code name, if you could give yourself a code name, what would it be and why?
Well, I am grateful to you for having given me a heads up on this question.
Of course.
And I was telling my daughter just a couple days ago that I was thinking about this, that this was going to be a question, and what should I do? And she thought about it for a second. She knew it had to have something to do with birds. She just knew immediately. And she said, Kingfisher. Oh. And I thought, yeah, I like that. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, I would take that as a homage to the brave men and women in the clandestine service who stick their neck out every day. If you've ever seen, first of all, I think kingfishers are beautiful. The incredibly striking belted kingfishers we have, the colorful kingfishers all over the world, amazing birds, lovely to see. But if you've ever seen a kingfisher, it almost always, you'll see it on a branch overhanging the water, a body of water, sitting very still, trying not to be noticed, unobserved, but observing. Keen, very keen powers of observation, watching until its target comes into view, and then it swoops down really fast, grabs it, and comes back. And I just think, that's a lot of those qualities that I admired when I was in the intelligence community, of those people out there waiting and watching for the right target, swooping in at just the right moment. So Kingfisher seems like a pretty good one.
I love it.
Perfect.
That was like a nursery rhyme.
Yeah, it was
beautiful.
perfect. Yeah,
Yeah.
It was perfect. We can't thank you enough for joining us today. I think this is a great way to start off season 8. We are really thankful that you joined us. I feel like we have to do. I don't know if your mother is living, but she just seemed like such a superwoman, and she's looking down at you, and she just seemed like just such a superwoman, and I felt like I needed to call her out because just you telling us everything that she did is also equally amazing. So, thank you, and thank you for your service to our country, and we're so grateful that you came on Iron Butterfly.
Oh, Megan, thank you. It was so much fun to be with you and Kate, have this conversation, and thank you for all that you guys do to help tell these stories and lift up women and inspire women, both in what you do and the stories that you make sure get told. So thank you. Really a pleasure to be here.
This has been an episode of Iron Butterfly Podcast. To learn more about Iron Butterfly Media, visit our website at www.ironbutterflymedia.com. If you like the show, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe, and follow Iron Butterfly on social media for bonus content. You can also support us on Patreon. Lastly, we want to thank our producer, Amanda Young, and the entire Iron Butterfly team. Stay fierce, and we'll talk next time.